come up over the last year and through the annual plan submissions. We certainly recognise that it does take time to get them into policy, and this Plan Change 6 was the first opportunity to put that through. So there are two main areas that we have are relevant to this discussion. If I look at the second bullet point first, the review of the stream depletion policy, I did have a good look at the stream depletion policy that we had put up in the Tuki and recognise that it could be better targeted given the issues that were faced in the Twyford. So through our submission to Plan Change 6, when it was notified with the Tuki catchment proposal, we put forward an amended stream depletion policy which effectively brought in another classification which related to a more direct stream depleters, a higher level of depletion, being subject to a minimum flow cut-off, but then another block of depletion being subject to a reduced pumping rate, so not having a complete cut-off at that point.
Can I ask a question at this point, just on that fact? I'm just looking at your provision of water for preventing plant death and review of stream depletion policy. Could you have achieved the same thing with a water shortage order during that period? No. No?
We couldn't rewrite policy using a water shortage order.
Sorry, no, I mean to achieve the same effect, could a water shortage order have given you the power to provide water for preventing plant death?
No, because we would had to have breached minimum flow conditions. The water shortage order would have resulted in us restricting more people, not providing more water. Yes.
Yep. So where was I? So stream depletion policy, yes, that's right. We have...
Sorry, are you talking about section 329 of the RMA, which is in point 44? Is that what you're referring to?
Yep.
So that doesn't allow for flexibility to take those actions and provide for a number of users who need it at the time?
It wouldn't allow us to take water below the minimum flow. In essence, what we did in terms of moving water around is exactly what we did through the transfers. Where water could be moved lawfully, we did that. But the water shortage order would not have allowed us to ignore minimum flows and allow irrigation to occur. The intent of a water shortage order would be to come along and say, actually the minimum flow in this river or the climate conditions are such that this river is in danger of drying up, we're going to ban all takes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, was this provision discussed with the Twyford users?
No, it wasn't. They didn't bring a water shortage order proposal to us, but we looked at that early on and said, is this an option for us to manage the situation? And no, it wasn't. It would have resulted in a far more difficult proposition for us to manage.
Do you think that perhaps it might have been something that the growers themselves could have navigated through with sharing of resources if they'd been brought into it?
So effectively they were already doing that. So like I'd indicated earlier, around December these guys were coming to us and saying, how do we set this up to get success? And so we were providing them information. They were voluntarily rostering and rationing water, moving takes out of direct stream takes into groundwater takes to try and get the best outcome they could out of the Raupiri.
With no disrespect, it just seems as if you did everything possible last year or December, but and then in the paper in the last month or so, it's sort of been evident that there's a lot of people that were very dissatisfied. Is the fact that it was the expectations are unrealistic? And part B is, given what you know now, would you do anything if the same thing happens next December?
Look, the water management framework was not designed to deal with a 1 in 35 year drought, and it didn't it didn't deliver for everybody all of the time. There's no arguing that, there's no debating it. Would we do anything differently? I guess there have been a lot of learnings have come out of this event, and those things are the things we've picked up, and we're looking to move on now, like the issues that we're looking at in terms of adjusting policy to say, well, can we make the stream depletion assessments work differently to get a better outcome? Can we provide water for preventing plant death or damage to permanent rootstock? I take Councillor Curtin's point around trying to pick a time which we can say, we're sort of into the danger territory. I'm not aware of anybody within New Zealand sort of coming up with a process or a model to do that. It's something we would just have to have a crack at, I guess. But certainly there is some scope there to say, can we use or develop some modelling to try and predict what we might be heading into. Could be quite difficult, quite expensive to do, but it could be possible. I don't know.
Okay, so this is the last slide anyway. So in terms of the stream depletion policy, we got an independent expert to prepare some evidence for us for the Tukituki change process, and that's confirmed that the amendment that we put forward is robust and is appropriate. He did make a recommendation in terms of raising that minimum threshold from 1 litre a second to 2 litres a second. So that policy is now being reviewed by Hort NZ as part of their evidence work, and we are working with them collaboratively to ensure that assessment of that policy is appropriate for the lower Tukituki, and then we will also be working collaboratively with them in terms of assessing the economic impact of that policy. So that work is all happening, going through this Tukituki plan change process, and will serve as a basis for consideration for the collaborative group to consider, particularly in light of the Heretaunga Plains area. In terms of preventing plant death of permanent rootstock, again, we listened to the submissions. We also heeded the economic analysis that we did ourselves around the impact of the increased minimum flows on that. And as a consequence of that, we have made a recommendation through our planning evidence to provide for applications to be made or water to be taken for that purpose below the minimum flow. I do note that these are just amendments. They are still subject to the process. There will be submitters out there who may not like that, and we'll be presenting evidence to the contrary to that. There is still the issue of quantifying that. What does that look like? How much water does that mean? And so really the door is open for the Hort sector to come back through evidence themselves to say, well, that's great, we're making some movement, and this is how much we would need to in order to assure that. So I do emphasise, though, that it is around permanent rootstock, not necessarily the perennial crops that are growing. So those are two responses that we have responded to from a planning framework with Tuki plan change, and obviously can be fed into the collaborative process for the Heretaunga Hariri area. And as well, there is scope for individuals to sort of consider that policy development as more up-to-date policy and see how it might apply to current consents.
Just on the subject of Plan Change 6, which is of course a different catchment, it's the Tukituki catchment. Globally around the area, around Hawke's Bay, so looking at the Tūtai Kiri catchments in Nara and the Karamu and Tukituki catchments, how many consent holders went on ban for a significant period of the summer? We know that Raupa only had 1 day, so I don't call that a significant ban, but of the others, all those tributaries up in the Tukituki and Waipawa area, the Tukituki itself.
So every system in the region but the Tūtai Kiri in all locations at some point was on ban. The tuk-tuk at Red Bridge, had an extended period of ban as well. So yeah, it impacted most systems across the region that had a minimum flow.
And this would be a range of type of use for consent holders, from dairying to horticulture. We can just tease out a little bit about the tuki bans as far as fruit growers went. There's a whole lot of apple growers up in the Ruataniwha on very shingly ground who've got surface takes or stream depleting takes. So they must have all been on ban. How were they helped over this summer with their?
I'm not aware of. I don't know which takes you're referring to specifically. Mr. Apple does have some takes up in there. I don't know whether they had alternative supplies. We certainly didn't have. We didn't have people coming to us in that part of the region looking for alternative solutions.
And the lower end of that, Mr. Chairman, the looking at permanent rootstock and provision of water preventing plant death, but of course we've got huge crop losses. There's not only did fruit growers suffer, not only did sheep growers suffer great losses and dairying, but some of those, there is, at the end of the day, there is no solution to other than stored water to being able to provide sufficient to carry all economic benefits of what you've planted going forward?
For us to say. It's not for us to say.
It's possible, but yeah.
Lotus question.
Storage may have been a solution in this catchment at this time, but don't know.
Councillor Gilbertson.
Yeah, two questions. The first one, you said it was an abnormal event, a 1 in 35 year. We said several years ago that our view, our policy, or whatever, is that a 1 in 20 year drought will become a 1 in 5 year drought. Are you working on the assumption, the old thing, that we're going on the old fashioned data, or are you now saying that, see what I'm getting at? A 1 in 35 year drought, but we said some time ago as part of our official response to global change, that little bit of it, was that a 1 in 20 year drought will become a 1 in 5 year drought. So your 1 in 35, is that the old system or the new system? Because if we're expecting bad droughts every 1 in 5 years, that would be abnormal, but not that abnormal.
So,
do you follow?
I'm not sure that I follow. Are you?
Yeah.
If you're asking whether the water management framework was set up around 1 in 35 year, no, it's not. It's set up more around a 1 in 5 year event. But how is it calculated? Is that what you're asking?
It's based on history.
It's based on climate records.
It's not the new. Yeah. It's just.
So we're not saying those records don't
No,
effective anymore because we've got a whole new scenario, which is global warming, 1 in 5 drought.
No,
okay, so that's the old-fashioned data.
Yeah.
Second question is, 5-6 years ago, Daryl Liu turned up here from Otago, Southland, and this before your time, but he said we were 20 years behind in water management, drought management, etc., and we should be looking at global consents, alternative irrigation days, sharing information, and water use groups. And it sounds to me like Ralph had one of them, but no one else did. So why has it taken so long to implement what Daryl Liu suggested we do 5 years ago? Because that, in his opinion, as an expert, was a pretty easy and straightforward thing to do that we could have implemented immediately.
Good question, Councillor Gilbertson, because the Regional Resource Management Plan, which was made operative in 2006, probably before Mr. Liu arrived, provides for all of those actions to occur.
Right, so why didn't we do it?
We have made provision for it, but, it takes two to tango. And there are individual choices around how water is managed besides that of the council, but we certainly, the plan encourages global consents, rostering, rationing, etc.
I know that, but I thought an active policy would have been to go out, considering we were told we were 20 years behind, would have been an active policy and going back to the 1 in 5 year droughts, 1 in 35. It would have been much more proactive of this council to have been on the front foot and encouraged that, as Mr. Liu considered.
And the council has. We've got a staff member who works on, who has been working since she was started here on working with water user groups.
Okay, that's fine, but I just think it should happen 5 years ago. But that was my question.
You can't force it, is the issue. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I'd just like Mr. Maxwell to give us some idea of when it's likely that a ban's going to be imposed. What information does staff provide to irrigators that a ban is likely to kick in? Clearly you don't get up one morning and say, well, we'll have a ban tonight and tell everybody. Is this information pre-fed to users? And I know when there's no water, there's no water. That's clear. But it's been said to me by some folk in Twyford that what happened was the irrigation warnings were given, and then there was a huge uptake in irrigation to try and get as much water on before the ban kicked in, which was in a sense self-defeating. I understand why it was done. Probably ought to have done the same thing. But so could you just perhaps walk us through the lead in time that you provide?
So yes, again a very relevant point, and I guess another reason why global consents or management on a larger scale would and will have a much a more improved outcome in these situations. Couple of points to that. One is that initially we were publicising these sorts of things through the media, but we were asked not to by the industry, just saying, hey, we'd prefer you didn't do that, and we respected that. We were, why would they say that? Because of my understanding is that there was some risk to market reactions to hearing that there were issues in New Zealand, so we agreed to. Yep. So we tried to work with them, provide them information without sort of broadcasting it widely. In terms of notifications, we provide them warnings, and we do and have just recently set up a new low flow notification system, which will be an automated system, which will provide people information via text, email, or voicemail on impending flow bans or cut-offs. The best solution to all of this is that the irrigators are proactive about looking at what's happening with the river conditions, monitoring it, and then self-managing, which is why the telemetry information and getting that up onto our website and providing them that in as best and as wide a range of forms as possible is probably the most effective solution, is to give them the ability to self-manage rather than us sort of turning up and saying you're on or off one day or another.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your explanations. Ian, is there any recognition that perhaps dealing with the water shortage over these drought times has more serious implications for fruit growers and people who grow trees because they're in the ground for a long time compared to crops, which are maybe just a one-year thing, or sheep and beef, which actually can be moved elsewhere, they can actually be sold, whereas it's a much more serious effect for fruit growers?
I think